And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we're going to be doing another Dice Throne hero review and analysis. And today, up for review, is the Tactician. Now, I want to say, I was in middle school, and the gas station that I walked past on my way home from school every day had Street Fighter 2. And at a certain point, that arcade cabinet got changed into Super Street Fighter 2. And all of the older kids, as soon as M. Bison was a playable character in Super Street Fighter 2, all of the older kids started destroying me with this guy. So when I first saw the Tactician as a Dice Throne hero, I was like, oh no. I had like trauma related flashbacks to how powerful I assumed this guy was going to be. Well, we'll get to his review and analysis in a moment, but at the top of the video, I want to take a second to just kind of go over housekeeping and my intent with this. So, as I break down the hero and I talk about the things that I would do if I was piloting him, I am coming at it from the perspective of a tournament player who's trying to win more games in a competitive setting. If that's not how you want to engage with Dice Throne, that is completely okay. If you're a casual player, if you're a kitchen table player who just likes to throw dice with your kids or your game group on the weekends, you are definitely welcome here. And maybe there's something of value for you here in this video. Maybe it'll be a little too in the weeds, a little too mathy, and that might not be how you personally want to engage with Dice Throne, but that's completely okay. You're welcome to get as much or as little value out of the video as you want. And similarly, even if you are another competitive try-hard player, your approach to the game might not be exactly the same as mine. So I'm going to break down what I think about the character and how I play the character, but I want to be clear that there are more than there could be multiple right answers for the correct piloting decisions on this and every Dice Throne hero. So, with that being said, I always like to start this off by taking a look at the pamphlet, which I'm now self-conscious about calling pamphlet because I guess it's called leaflet, which was pointed out. Shout out to whoever pointed that out to me in the comments the other day. There is a lot going on here. Some of these status effects we've seen before with other heroes, and some of these are characters specific to the Tactician. Now you'll notice just above his 321 die face, it says hero setup on this leaflet. Now, your version of Tactician might not have the hero setup on the front of the pamphlet. That's because the original version of this guy that came out had a different pamphlet. This is one of the three heroes in the second season that were given an update when, gosh, was it Marvel came out? So I'm going to specifically be talking about the version of Tactician after that pamphlet update. So if your leaflet doesn't look exactly like mine, hop on to whatever it is, roxley.com, and you can get a PDF version of this, which you can print, or if you want to have a nice paper one, you can also get those. I don't know how much those cost now. Okay, so let's zoom in on the Tactician's abilities and take a look at what this guy does. So to start with, tactical advantage. Now this is the gas in this guy's engine. This is the entire axle around which this wheel turns. This is important thing in random metaphor for the Tactician. He is a tactical guy. Now, I mentioned Street Fighter a little bit ago. This is not the M. Bison that's shooting flaming blue fire across the screen, driving at you. This is a much more grounded, strategic, well, tactical character. And that is going to be his strengths, but also kind of his weaknesses, which we'll get to at the end of the video. So, tactical advantage, this is the lifeblood of this hero. This is a key and critical component to literally everything this guy does. So, what is tactical advantage? This is a positive status effect. It starts with a stack limit of 5, but he does have some ways to increase that. So before I read all the effects, just to be clear, you can spend these tokens as many times and at any time to activate them for the effect. Obviously, you can see at the bottom there's one that's limited to the main phase, but other than the effect itself being time gated, these can be spent essentially at instant speed. So you can spend a token to gain a combat point. You can spend a token to re-roll one of your dice at any time. This includes like defense rolls and upkeep rolls and stuff. You can spend 3 of these tokens to draw a card. I love drawing cards. You can spend 3 of these tokens to inflict targeted on a chosen opponent. Now, I'll get into it more when we actually get to the status effect targeted, but if tactical advantage is the gas in the engine for the Tactician, Targeted is like the wheels on the car. Like targeted is very, very important. It is almost as critical as tactical advantage is for the tactician to be able to get damage out and actually win games. But we'll get to that in a second. Spend 4 tokens to gain a protect. This is a very important token, but has some weaknesses. And finally, you can spend 4 tokens to transfer one status effect from any player to any player. This can only be done during your main phase. So there's a few things I want to say about that last effect first. The ability to transfer effects can sometimes be really great. It looks good in situations like picking a burn token up off yourself and plopping it onto the pyromancer who gave it to you. That feels pretty good. But there are a lot of heroes, particularly in the Marvel box and the X-Men box, that have status effects that are either not transferable or they're not good. Like even taking a bond off of a Huntress so she can't use it, that doesn't feel the best. So the situations where your opponent doesn't have statuses that you can get any benefit out of stealing, or doesn't have statuses that you can cleanse off of yourself, and it's limited to the main phase. So the 4 token expenditure to deal with status effects, there are going to be games where it looks really good, like giving a Shadow Thief back his poison throughout the game and kind of shutting down that element of the Shadow Thief's game. So there are definitely games where the ability to transfer more than one to most of us only see our transference once per game. We get to transfer 1 token per game. Tactician can do this multiple times, and there are going to be game states where that feels really unfair and it looks really good, but it's also expensive. That uses a lot of your tactical advantage, and so much of his kit relies on knowing when to use tactical advantage and having it when you need it, that I find it hard to really lean into that and say like, oh, this is a strength. Some matchups it's irrelevant, and even in the matchups where it's good, if you're using your tactical advantage there, that means you're not using it to draw extra cards. That means maybe you're not getting targeted on your opponent, which is priority number 2. If we make a roadmap for how to win games with Tactician, priority 1 is getting the tactical advantage. We stack our tac advantage high, and then we put targeted on our opponent is like literally number 2. So you've got to make some tough choices because you can't rely on having enough tactical advantage to do everything. Moving down to take a look at Constrict. So this is a somewhat difficult status effect to get too excited about. You inflict this on an opponent, and during their next offensive roll phase, a player that has the Constrict on them must pay 1 combat point per roll attempt beyond the first. And at the conclusion of the roll phase, you remove this token. So, first of all, in competitive dice throwing, it's very common to not use all 3 of your rolls to begin with. Especially when I'm presenting a straight. If I'm gonna show you a straight, I want to have another reroll in my back pocket in case you try to push me off that 3 or that 4 in the middle of my straight. So presenting an ability activation with 1 reroll remaining is already kind of baked into how competitive dice throwing is played. Now, not every player does it. There are nuances around the edges. I'm not trying to say every player has to have an homogenized play style, but it's very common to see competitive players not use all 3 of their roll attempts. This is optional. You do not have to, at the start of your roll phase, say, oh, well, I want to make sure I have all 3 roll attempts available, so I'm going to go ahead and pay those 2 combat points right now. I get to throw my dice and, oh, look, roll 1. I got an ability I can activate. I don't want to spend any coins. And Constrict does literally nothing. So it doesn't make me pay for it at a time that it could punish me, where I could pay like if I had to pay this coin at the start of my offensive roll phase, or I lost the roll attempts to begin with. Well, now it's like, okay, well, I want to at least guarantee I get 2 rolls. So, okay, maybe I'll pay 1 coin at the. No, I get to throw the dice, see what they are, then decide if I want to pay. So the timing of when this effect happens is very generous to the player you're inflicting it on, and the effect that it has, making you or trying to make you give up a roll attempt or penalizing you for using a roll attempt, that's already a behavior a lot of competitive players are already used to. So this status effect is just not very strong. There are going to be times if your opponent has no coins in their coin purse, they're combat point poor, and they have no cards, and you put this on them, and then they're just forced to essentially like top deck their roll. Whatever they roll on the first roll, they have to take. There are times where this could look cool, but that's just not something you're going to run into in competitive dice throwing very often. Like players tend to be pretty good about managing how many combat points they have available. Nobody wants to be at zero when they go into an offensive roll phase. That's already a habit that competitive players tend to have in place. We already tend to not use all of our roll attempts. Okay, I'm going to stop going on about constrict. This is a very anemic status effect. This is not a status effect I would make ability activation decisions based on. It's a status effect that's just gravy. It shows up sometimes. Sometimes it can put a little bit of economic pressure on our opponents, but it's not something that I really bake into the core of my game plan with the tactician. Okay, moving down to targeted. Quite the opposite of constrict. This is a truly crucial status effect for the tactician. We haven't looked at his board yet, but when we do, you're going to notice very quickly that the tactician has printed damage that is below average. The only way to make up for this is by getting targeted onto your opponent and making sure that it stays there. This does, of course, mean he has difficult matchups against the kinds of heroes that can repeatedly cleanse status effects off of themselves, such as himself. He can outsmart himself, but also Seraph, Monk, the heroes that can deal with his targeted. He's going to have a tough time putting damage out there. This is such an important status effect. I kind of went on a rant about how important targeted is when I did the Moon Elf review and analysis. All of that applies here, and it maybe applies even more given that Moon Elf has a very sturdy damage mitigation plan, and Tactician's damage mitigation is a little more porous, which we're going to get to right now. Let's look at the Protect token. Now, we talked about how important this token was to the Paladin and his whole tapestry of damage prevention. Well, the Tactician does not have a tapestry of damage prevention. He has Protect, and he's got a little more going on defense wise than just Protect, but he's relying on Protect much more heavily than Paladin does. This is a token that when you have it on you, you can spend it and prevent half of the incoming damage rounded up. The problem is it is so susceptible to removal. People are going to know that you have access to protect, and if you're sitting around on a bunch of tactical advantage, again, in order to get that, it's going to cost us 4 tokens. If you're going into an offensive roll phase, or before you enter that offensive roll phase, you see the opposing tactician has 4 tactical advantage on them, and you're holding a what status effects. Maybe you throw that what status effects out there. This forces the tactician to spend all 4 onto the protect while they're still vulnerable to get that out of here, or transference, or bye-bye. There's a bunch of ways that you can kind of funnel the tactician into having to deploy his protect at times when the token itself is vulnerable, that it's hard when playing as the tactician to really rely on this, but you have to. You need damage mitigation. This is a hero that is going to have a hard time winning the damage races with like Pyro or Artificer or some of the other aggressive heroes that we have. So the games are going to go a little longer in those matchups. He's going to have to play more like the control hero. Against the control heroes, you don't have to worry so much about the damage mitigation, but now you're on the opposite side of trying to be the beatdown in those matchups with less than average damage, and that's where our targeted comes in. So the status effects on the Tactician's pamphlet are really important, uh, with the exception of Constrict, but the tactical advantage is the life's blood of his game plan. Targeted is how he closes out games, and Protect is how he survives to be able to close out games with targeted. Very, very reliant on his status effects. So if you're playing as the tactician, you need to be thinking about, has my opponent spent their transference yet? Have I seen my opponent's what status effects yet? And if you haven't seen those key cards, be careful in how you manage your status effect economy, because they are threats, and in a competitive setting, your opponent is going to be gunning for them. So let's take a closer look at the tactician's dashboard. And of course, the thing I always say at this point is, man, this artwork sure looks great. I particularly like the mushroom cloud above the tactician's name in the middle. I think that, and another one behind him, that really plays into the type of character that they were going for here. And, man, he just doesn't have art that doesn't look great. So, as always, another tremendous hero dashboard that looks cool and feels strong when it's on the table in front of you. All right, let's dive into taking a look at these powers. So we're going to start with Saber Strike. Now, as a basic attack, we have 4, 5, 6 with the die faces that you would expect. Again, Tactician is a 3, 2, 1 die face, which is a very friendly, we call this the easiest die facing. But this power at 4, 5, 6 is below average damage. Even with targeted, we're looking at 6, 7, 8, which is not great damage, and there's no additional effect that you get with this power at all. If you want to try to upgrade this, it's going to cost you a combat point. It's going to bring it up to 5, 6, 7, which is in the range of average damage. If you get all sabers, you're getting to that 7 number, which I like to think of that as like the lore of defendable damage. We want to get to 7. That's our average. And it gives you the ability to, with 3 of a kind, inflict a constrict. Um, in my opinion, I don't want to roll basic attacks with this hero ever. I'm just not interested in doing that. I understand that sometimes we're going to have to, and I hope that the only times when that happens are times when I have already inflicted targeted on my opponent. But this is a weak power that I don't want. And the upgrade, getting the damage up there a little bit, sure, okay, but I don't care at all about the 3 of a kind, and I think I would rather have the 2 combat points in my purse so that I could spend them on a what status effects or so wild or a lot of other cards in my deck other than this upgrade. I don't like this upgrade. I don't like this power. Okay, so moving down to Profiteer. Man, this power. So when I first started playing Dice Throne, I found the achievements that were things you could do within the game, like feats. And it was like a whole checklist. And I don't remember many of them, but one of them in particular I do remember because I tried really, really hard to make this happen in a 1v1 game, is to take 3 offensive roll phases in a row as a result of Profiteer. Now, how do we do that? Well, let's read Profiteer. You activate this with a 1 through 3, and then 3 faces of the 4, 5, which is not the like easiest thing to roll for, but it's not too bad. You gain a tactical advantage and you roll 1 die. On the 1 through 3 face, you deal 5 damage, which is not good damage. On a 4, 5, you get 4 tactical advantage, which, while that is a decent amount of tactical advantage, again, this is not a hero that has lots of ways to soak damage, particularly in a matchup against somebody like Pyro. You really don't have time to waste on setup turns. So that's not an outcome I would be super enthused about getting. And on a 6, you draw a card and then immediately take another ORP. So to try to get this power twice in a row, and then on the rider die, get a 6 twice in a row to get that 3 RP. Spent a lot of time on this in my early Dice Throne days. And what I have to say is that this power is generally not great. Not a lot of damage. It's decent tactical advantage, but you really don't have a lot of time. How many turns would you be able to activate setup turns and then go into doing something afterwards? It's only going to be a couple turns throughout the game, and against another aggressive hero, maybe even less than that. Getting the 6 on this lets you draw a card and then take a whole nother turn, but what is the quality of that turn? The quality of that 6 is dependent on what the randomness of the next offensive roll phase is. Yes, you have 1 extra card in your hand when you go through that, but all in all, this is a power that it's kind of frustrating because I want it to be better than it is. It feels like you compare it to, say, like the barbarian status effect stun, where you get to take multiple attacks in a row. But the thing about stun is it's always being inflicted by an attack that's dealing good damage, and then you get to do another attack. With Profiteer, if you're chaining multiple ORPs together, you're not dealing any damage while you're doing that. And it ends up not being that much of a threat. So let's take a look at the upgrade. At Profiteer 2, you automatically get 2 tactical advantage instead of 1. The 5 damage on the 1 through 3 turns into a 6, which is actually, I mean, it's better. It's still below the 7 that we want to see. And the 4-5 result goes from 4 tactical advantage down to 3. The 6 remains the same. This is not a power I'm crazy about, but I suppose I should mention, with the new update, the Tactician gets 2 tactical advantage at the start of the game, which means a power like Profiteer, where he's able to get a 3rd tactical advantage on his first roll phase. The first thing he does gets him up to 3, and he can slap that targeted on. That does, in my opinion, make this power considerably better in that circumstance. So on the first turn of the game, if you're trying to get that targeted up and established and running, I think Profiteer is a much better power. But over the course of the game, this is not a power that I'm going to come back to. This is not a power I feel great about having to activate because there's just so much variance. It could be slightly below average damage. It could be average damage if the target is already in place. It could be a whole nother offensive roll phase where I roll an ultimate. So I mean, it could like the ceiling is quite high. Taking an extra turn is a big deal. But the reason stun is so good and profiteer is not quite as good again is because profiteer isn't dealing damage while also giving you that extra turn. So that's a lot of words to say. In my opinion, I don't think this upgrade is worth it really at any point in the game. This would be an automatic sell for me. Okay, let's take a look at Carpet Bomb. So as is kind of common in Season 2, in this slot we have two of the most common face and two sixes required to activate this power. It lets you gain one tactical advantage and deal two collateral damage to two different chosen opponents. Obviously in multiplayer, this is much better because you're dealing 4 damage instead of 2. It's worth noting that this is collateral damage, so it will not be affected by targeted or attack modifiers, which is brutal. This is brutal. Uh, that does make the base level of this power not my favorite thing to activate, though on the first turn, it's almost worth it just to get the tactical advantage up and running. Maybe you don't use it to slap the targeted on right away because the collateral damage won't benefit from it, and you maybe don't want to leave it vulnerable to your opponent's main phase speed removal during their turn, but it gets you to where you have the 3 tactical advantage, and then next turn you could slap that targeted on before you go for something else. So this is a very strong first turn play, even though it's not the strongest power. Looking at the upgrade, this is going to cost you 2 combat points. It increases the amount of tactical advantage to 2, which kind of pays for itself given that you can trade a tactical advantage in for a combat point at any time. You can invest in this, activate it once. It completely pays for itself with actual combat points, although the damage stays at 2 and it stays as collateral. You also gain the ability Strategize, which requires 4 of a kind on the fortified dice face that lets you draw 2 and gain 3 tactical advantage. Now, I am normally pretty negative on backup abilities. A lot of the backup abilities are marginal. They're there so you don't have to say the word whiff, and they are marginally better than saying the word whiff. I don't mind this backup ability. The 3 tactical advantage says targeted to me. It says another card. You get to draw 2 cards with this. You're gonna see a lot of your deck that could be draw 2 into your twice as wild and the 3 tactical advantage to pay for it. There are places where I feel like strategize as a setup turn can actually really bail you out and help you out a lot as the tactician player. Now, again, I've said this already, you're not going to have the ability to take a lot of setup turns. This isn't like a Shadow Thief where he can basically buy infinity time while he fills his coin purse and fills the hand. That's not how the tactician game plan is going to play. He is on a much shorter clock because he cannot mitigate as much damage as some of these other control heroes. He also doesn't do as much damage per turn, so he has to run faster than some of the damage heroes. So while this is a setup power that I do kind of like, this is a character that you have to be very cautious and deliberate about when you choose to take setup power. And I suppose since I haven't like defined it, a setup power is one of these activations where you're not dealing damage. You're not pushing the game towards an end state. You're just setting yourself up to have a stronger turn later. You're investing this turn's action in making next turn or 2 subsequent turns much stronger. I don't feel like the tactician has a lot of time to do that, but if you have a parlay on you, or there are reasons why sometimes you want to take a setup power. I think as a setup power, strategize is quite good. And as a backup power, this is great. This is like one of the best like backup bottom of the card upgrade powers I've seen on a lot of them. This is something I would actually use. And overall, so what do I think of this upgrade? That's a lot of words. I think this is an upgrade you probably can play. In multiplayer games, absolutely. You know, the carpet bomb power is much better in multiplayer. Um, do I feel great about playing this? Uh, no, I don't. I see the arguments for selling it. This isn't a power you necessarily want. And I don't think you should be making competitive gameplay decisions based on okay, like even as backup powers go, this is a good backup power, but it's not the optimal thing I want to be doing when I'm piloting the tactician. So if I see this like turn one, maybe slap it down and try to go for it. Uh, get my targeted setup, or at least get enough tack advantage so that I can get targeted setup next turn. So earlier in the game, I can maybe see it. And matchup dependent. If you're playing Pyromancer, you absolutely cannot play this. You do not have time to play this. You've got to go for damage. Like like you gotta make sure that you're actually putting damage across the board. So you've got to be choosing abilities that let you build up your tactical advantage while also pushing damage, which Carpet Bomb does, just not terribly efficiently. So I feel like in the aggro matchups, you probably don't have time to even think about strategize. Even though you've got to play those more as a control player, it's a little too anemic in my opinion. Probably not an upgrade I'm going to choose. Although there are some places where I do get a little excited about this power overall. Okay, now we're going to move down to strategic approach. Now you look at this and it's like, oh, that's a full house. It's three of the 1 through 3 die faces and two of the sixes. So unlike a lot of heroes that get the full house with the two faces required being the 4/5, Tactician has to hit sixes. That's pretty rough. And this power deals 7 damage, which is exactly average. It is one of the better powers for the tactician to deal damage as far as a raw damage number. I'm not terribly excited about the constrict. If this is a power you get though, you're gonna take it. Like that's one of the highest numbers on his board in terms of damage you can do. And if the target is in place, now you're doing 9, which is great. 9 damage on a defendable attack. I think you feel pretty good about that. So what happens if we upgrade this? So with the upgrade, which costs 2 combat points, you gain a tactical advantage as well as inflicting a constrict, and you deal 7 damage. You then get indirect approach, which is 3 of the 1 through 3, so basically a basic attack plus 1 instance of the 4/5 die face to gain 2 tactical advantage and deal 2 undefendable damage. This can benefit from targeted. So if you have at least 1 tactical advantage on you and you indirect approach, you can slap targeted on and turn that into 4 damage right away. Not a bad backup. I mean, considering most backups are just marginally better than saying I whiff, this one is considerably better than that, especially given the rest of the composition of his board. There's not a lot of options for undefendable damage. So if you're dealing with somebody who has a really nasty, annoying defense like a Shadow Thief or a Pyromancer, this is an upgrade that I think you would strongly consider and maybe even try to get rolls towards that indirect approach, especially if they've got the targeted on them already. Is it great? Well, no, it's still kind of anemic damage, but that is the character we're playing. The tactician is not a damage powerhouse. This is a guy where you get rewarded for knowing when to use your tactical advantage tokens to create card advantage, to disrupt status effects, to push through rolls that you wouldn't have otherwise got, to be able to pay for things your opponents didn't see coming. This is how you're going to win games. You've got to kind of leverage your opponent's decision making against them in a way that a lot of other heroes don't have to. And what you've got to do with him is know when to blow up your opponent's because you're looking at so many more cards. You've got to know when to deploy those dice mods to clip your opponent's let's helping hand that straight. Oh, that caused a whiff. I feel so bad for you. Pass turn. All right, let's go. These are the kind of moments you're gonna have to create with Tactician in order to come out on top in these games because you're not going to get there with raw damage numbers. So in that tapestry of all of that stuff going on, in that constellation of data points, I think indirect approach being a way to both generate the gas in the tank that we need in the form of tactical advantage and to avoid problematic defenses. I can hardly believe I'm saying it, but this is 2 cards in a row where I feel like the backup ability is almost worth the cost of the card. Literally 1 activation of indirect approach could get you those 2 combat points back. Adding the tactical advantage to the main ability to strategic approach, sure. This is one of his highest damage abilities on his board. So if you get it, you're probably going to take it. 9 damage with targeted. But is it a huge priority or is it something I want in every single matchup? No. If my opponent's defense is something I don't really care about that much, then I'm probably not going to invest in this just to avoid the defense. So I think it needs to be a defense that you're scared of, and that makes indirect approach a lot better. Otherwise, maybe you just sell this and use it to pay for twice as wild or helping hand or something. Okay, we're going to move up to flank. Now, one of the things I say every time we talk about a small straight is that you are going to activate this ability a lot because small straights just kind of come to you when you're playing Dice Throne. The number of times I've just thrown the dice out and it's like, oh, okay, small straight, roll one, and present it to my opponent. It happens. Now, as far as the quality of this ability, again, we have a tactical advantage generator, so particularly that turn one play, trying to get to that third tactical advantage and slap a targeted on your opponent. This is a particularly great one because it turns into 8 damage. So if you're able to pull off that turn one play, you activate flank, you get that third tack, you slap the targeted on, you're now coming at your opponent for an above average, 8. It's not a lot above average, but that's not what Tactician does. He's not a beater. But that's a good number to throw at your opponent on turn one before they've had a chance to do anything. So this is a power you're going to take, but like a lot of what the Tactician has going on, it's going to require you to have enough tactical advantage to get that targeted up and running to really get good value out of this. Looking at the upgrade, we now gain 2 tactical advantage. The upgrade costs 2, so essentially activating it once kind of pays for itself if you use your tactical advantage in that way, and it deals the same amount of damage. I'm probably not playing this upgrade. I know. Hey, we have to choose small straights because they come to us. It's what the dice gods have foretold. I know I talk about how we have to play small straights often, and so I tend to be a little bit more generous on the small straight upgrades because of how easy the roll is. And this one even pays for itself. And with all of that, it's hard for me to justify it. If you're swimming in the combat points, this is one I think you can get down. But if you're combat point starved at all, you've got to sell it. Even though it pays for itself with a single activation, this isn't necessarily the thing we want to be going for. This is better than like the Saber Strike upgrade. This isn't one of his worst upgrades. And there's certainly games where it could look good. Again, 2 tactical advantage is a big deal. That is a core part of our game plan. But given that so much of our tactical advantage has to be used to do other things, like get targeted up and running, the idea that you're going to be able to throw that tactical advantage away to get combat points back to then turn around and pay for something else, that's not going to be the majority of cases. Most of the time, if you pay for this, that tactical advantage is already going to be earmarked to go do something else. So you're actually investing 2 combat points in an upgrade that makes a small straight deal the same amount of damage. I have a hard time justifying that. Not a big fan of this upgrade, although the power is one, again, you're absolutely going to have to activate throughout the game in most games. All right, so going down to exploit. Now, exploit is, without a doubt, the best damage option on the Tactician's board that isn't called an ultimate. The problem is, it's a large straight. A lot of heroes have large straights that are one of their best damage dealing options, but large straights are not the easiest thing to activate. They require your dice to line up in a very particular way, and thus they're very disruptible. So while there's pressure to want to use all 3 rolls to try to get the large straight, if you present a 3-roll large straight and I present a helping hand and pick off your 3 in the middle, you can end up with a whiff. So they're more disruptible and there tend to be less outs once you've committed to one. But what does it do? So you gain 2 tactical advantage. I like that. You inflict a constrict. I don't really care. And then you deal 9 damage. 9 becomes 11 with targeted, which is an excellent amount of damage to be able to deal. Let's take a look at the upgrade on this. You go up to 3 tactical advantage, so it basically has a targeted built into it. That feels great. And you gain interdiction, which is a 1 through 3, 2 copies of a 4/5 die face, and a 6 to draw 2 cards and inflict constrict. No, absolutely not. I think this is an auto sell. I don't think you're going to have the freedom to go after a large straight. I mean, you might get one naturally, and that's great, but that doesn't happen very many turns in very many games, which means if you invest 2 coins into this upgrade, you might not activate it at all. you might only get it once or twice. And if you're trying to chase it, if you're trying to force it, that means you're not using your cards to disrupt your opponent. And I think that is a core key part for how the tactician is going to win games. You have to have the luxury of being able to get damage off on your side of the board while using your dice fix cards to manipulate and mess with your opponent. You've got to be able to disrupt your opponent. And if you're using your cards to force yourself into a straight for an 11 damage, that feels good, that looks good, especially compared to the rest of his board, but that's resources that can't be going to other critical parts of his kit. I don't think this upgrade is playable. Moving on to maneuver. Gain 5 tactical advantage. I love that number. So you'll max your stack out and then deal 5 undefendable damage. That's a great number. That turns into 7 if you've got the targeted on, which you can obviously pay for by gaining 5 with this ability itself. If you already have some tactical advantage on you and you activate this ability, you of course can spend it to gain combat points, draw cards, inflict target, whatever it is you need to do to get rid of it, get it out of the way, and let you gain 5 more. That's awesome. So the timing really works out for him. This is one of the best powers on his board, but it's a mini ult, and mini ults are not things we necessarily want to be chasing. Now, given that tactical advantage itself can reroll dice and can give you extra coins and can give you extra cards, you're likely to have more ways to get sixes and more things in your hand to sort of mitigate the probability of whiffing, or you're going to see your six, you're going to see your samesies more likely with how many extra cards you're going to be drawing as tactician. So the likelihood that you're going to chase after an ult or push yourself onto a mini ult or something, it's a little bit higher than it is with some other characters. But I can't, like, we don't chase mini ults. This is not a winning strategy, generally speaking, unless the stars are aligned. If we have a hand composition and we have a coin purse and a game state that supports us chasing the sixes, then by all means we do it. But we have to get these other pieces in place first. Like, as a general strategy, just throwing and hoping for sixes, it doesn't work out for me. I don't know if it works out for you. I hope I don't face you on the playmats. So what do you get when you upgrade this? With the upgrade, you still get the 5 tactical advantage. It adds a constrict. I do not care. And it adds 5 tactical advantage on the micro ult. You absolutely can't do that. There's no reason to play this upgrade. It's just an auto sell. The reconnaissance, 5 tactical advantage. It is better than saying the word whiff, but if you're sitting on 3 sixes and you can't get that fourth six, you're probably in pretty rough shape already. I don't think a bailout of some extra tactical advantage is going to make up that's just not a strong enough turn. It's not a strong enough backup power. This doesn't increase the damage at all. And Constrict is negligible. This costs 2 combat points to play. This is not an ability you want to be chasing. So overall, I don't think this is an upgrade that I have ever played in a game, and I don't think it's an upgrade that I'm likely to play. We're going to move down to countermeasures. So I've said a few times that the Tactician's defense options are maybe not as sturdy. He's got to be a little more nimble to play around incoming damage. So let's look at his countermeasures. You start by being able to roll 4 dice. For every 2 swords, you deal 1 damage. So it's a maximum damage back of 2. For every 4 or 5 die face, you prevent 1, and on 6, you gain, or not on, but for each 6, you gain tactical advantage. Obviously, this is kind of like Artificer wants to see synth on his defense. The Tactician kind of has that same sort of thing built in here. Having to hit 2 swords to deal 1 damage is pretty brutal. You cannot rely on this ability to deal extra damage back, which with a lot of heroes that have these lower overall damage numbers, their defense is a place where they make up some of that. That's not the case for Tactician. Again, Tactician is going to make up his damage by slapping targeted on people and messing up their rolls to get ahead in the life game. Being able to prevent damage here, sure, that's great. What do we get when we upgrade? So first of all, countermeasures 2, you gain a whole extra die, so you go up to 5 dice, and everything else remains exactly the same. This costs 3 combat points. This costs 3 combat points to roll 1 extra die. Against a hero where you know they're going to throw undefendable at you all over the place, Ninja being the example that I kind of go to for that sort of hero, not justifiable. A hero like Moon Elf, who is going to come at you with defendable damage all the time, maybe having that extra die to prevent 1 extra damage or gain 1 extra tactical advantage throughout the course of the game could be justifiable in the early turns. Once we hit the mid game or later, I don't think I don't think this is an upgrade that I could justify to myself. 3 is expensive, uh, which makes Countermeasures 3 all the more shocking at 5 combat points. I believe the most expensive card in the game, which is wild. Um, 5 combat points is incredibly expensive. It does double the amount of damage that you deal for every 2 1 through 3s that you roll. I cannot say that this is worth it. It's just so expensive. I There have got to be other things that you can do with your combat points that are better than investing in this defense, and particularly if it's against a hero who has a lot of undefendable attacks, that makes this look even even worse. Um, the 1 damage increase, I just don't see it being worth it, especially because it's every 2 swords you roll, so that's not something you're going to see on your defense all the time. Uh, Maybe I could see justifying paying 3 to get up to that 5th die, but even that feels pretty expensive. I suspect in most cases the base defense roll of Tactician, even if it's not ideal, it's what you're going to stick with because your resources are going to be going elsewhere. You're going to be paying for your twice as wilds. You're going to be paying for your get that out of here's, and trying to save up 5 or 3 combat points to upgrade your defense feels pretty expensive, in my opinion. All right, let's move over and take a look at the ultimate. All I survey, I command. Higher ground. So you got to roll all 6s, as is the case with ultimates. You inflict a targeted and a constrict. You increase the tactical advantage stack limit by 1, gain max tactical advantage, and deal 12 damage. So that 12 damage will always be 14, either because you're inflicting the targeted with the ultimate itself or because there was already a targeted on your opponent. This is a great ultimate. If you get it, you always go with it. I really like increasing stack limits by 1. We don't see a ton of that effect in the game, but all the heroes who have it definitely benefit from it. I like that the Tactician has this in his kit. All right, so let's put the board away and we're going to get the cards back out and let's take a look at the character-specific ambush card. This is a 1-cost instant action that gains 2 tactical advantage. There's no reason to ever not play this card. Again, most cards, I say, oh, there's no reason to ever not play this, but sometimes you might have to sell it. No, this one, there is no circumstances where you would ever sell this card because you can pay for it with 1 combat point, play it, and get 2 tactical advantage, which are then worth 2 combat points. So even if you need the combat point you would get from selling this, you can get there by the effect of this card. And it's essentially double. So you will never not play Ambush. Ambush is played in every game. Yeah, it's good. You need tactical advantage. This is an economical way to get it. Feigned Retreat. This costs 2, it prevents 3, and inflicts a constrict on your attacker. Again, constrict very rarely is going to have that big of an impact on the game, so I don't really care about that. This costs twice as much, as not this time. It does half as much work, and it's still a card you're probably going to play in all of your games. I don't know if this is a comment so much on the power level of this card specifically, or more a comment on the Tactician's overall kit. Every little piece of damage mitigation matters a great deal for this guy. He's a character that has all of the pieces in place to be a control, like long game type hero, except for the damage mitigation. So you have to kind of take all of it that you get and play your control game at a much faster pace than some of the other control heroes. So yes, in this kit, this card is fantastic. I mean, in general, the ability to pay 2 and prevent 3 is pretty strong. So it's not just that this is a great card for Tactician, it's that this is a pretty strong card overall, but in the Tactician, he really needs these types of effects, so it's even better for him. Disengage, another defensive card. It costs 0, so there's almost no reason why you wouldn't play this. You roll a d6, you can deal a couple damage back, prevent 3 damage. I mean, pay 0, prevent 3 is huge, and potentially gain a protect. In a lot of situations, that protect is going to be immediately spent to try to deal with the incoming attack, but sometimes this could get lethal on an attack. Somebody attacks in with just a couple damage left. Like maybe this is what you needed. This plus your 4 dice gets you to lethal. All of these options are viable, and of course, there's game states where you're going to favor one or the other. This is another card. I think you're going to play this in basically every game. War Room, one combat point, roll a d6 and gain half that as tactical advantage. So this is Vegas baby for TA. You play this in every game. You just absolutely have to play it. Worst outcome is it pays for itself with tactical advantage, but you got to play this. Bunker Up, cost 2, gain and protect. Why is this card not an instant? Why? The poor tactician. This card is not an instant. That you have to play it second main phase on your turn and just hope your opponent doesn't transfer or delete that protect before their offensive roll phase during their next turn. Brutal that this isn't an instant, but it's not an instant. So this is a main phase card. I think you probably have to play it, but ideally what you want to do is wait until the part of the game where your opponent has already spent their what status effects, spent their transference, spent their get that out of here, and you can play this into a safe board state. Are you always going to have that? Of course not. Another way you could think about this is I'll pay this, they transfer it. Well, now I can spend my tactical advantage and I force the removal out of their hand, and now I can safely use tactical advantage to get a protect in instant speed. So this, you could think of this card as paying 2 combat points to look at your opponent's hand and pay them a protect to discard their status removal, which doesn't sound great, but these are the kinds of levels of strategy you need to be thinking about with the tactician. Like, your cards aren't just their surface value. Maybe what you need to do is force that status removal out, bait that what status effects to get them to remove the protect. Then you can commit to playing War Room and stack your tactical advantage up and start going to work. So yeah, you'll probably play this. Promo card. So promos generally aren't allowed in competitive events, but this is where I'm talking about cards. So I'm going to talk about this one here. It costs 0, like all promo cards. You roll 1 die, like all promo cards. On a 6, you gain 4 tactical advantage. On any other outcome, you draw 1. It's fine. He needs tactical advantage. I mean, I would have loved to see this max out tactical advantage and inflict targeted. Like that feels a little more in line with some of the other promo cards, but we've seen some much weaker promo cards too. So this is a promo card. I mean, when I play these, I always just play it and then draw a card because I never roll the 6. So it's fine. Okay, in conclusion, if you are playing as the tactician, you need to do a few things, and they need to be kind of done, prioritized in your mind in this order. You need to prioritize getting your tactical advantage engine up and running, number 1, and you need to be aware of threats to that engine. An opponent who hasn't played what status effects is an opponent who could play what status effects, and that needs to be part of your calculations. Every turn, when you say pass and you have 5 tactical advantage on you, what are you going to do when your opponent plays what status effects? You should already have that in your mind before you get into that situation. So you're not on your opponent's turn scrambling and then realize, I made the wrong choice. I needed that extra combat point there. Have those decisions made before the card gets played because you know it's coming. If they've got it, they're coming for you. I think you need to prioritize your dice fix cards to messing with your opponents. Yes, we all have to sometimes rely on our dice fix cards to avoid having a whiff on our own turn. I get it, but don't plan for it. There's some heroes where I feel like you can really assemble dice fix cards in your hand so that when it comes time to do your big turn, you've got the Avengers assemble Infinity Stones of dice fix cards, and you can force that ultimate through no matter how many helping hands your opponent throws at you. Hopefully only one, because more than one would be cheating. I don't believe the tactician can play in that way. I don't think that he can use all of his dice fix cards for himself to force better rolls. So even if you're forcing yourself to the best possible thing on your board every time, you're not going to be a damage output machine like a beatdown hero would. But that's not your game. Your game is being sneaky, tactical, choosing the right moments, stealing the status effect, or disrupting your opponent when they think they have the upper hand. That's kind of the way you need to approach this hero. You're on the back foot from the jump. You're kind of on the back foot. Your damage isn't as high. It's harder for you to come back from a deficit. So you need to kind of avoid getting into that deficit in the first place. But your defense is also not the strongest, and there's some holes in that armor. So for people playing against the tactician, look at the array of things that I've laid out here. He is deeply, deeply reliant on tactical advantage, priority number one, and targeted priority number two. These two things have to be in place. And as kind of a general game plan, that he's going to be trying to build up combat point and card advantage and use that to mess you up. So my advice when playing against the tactician is you do it first. You push him, you force the tactician to spend his tactical advantage as quickly as possible. If you can steal the protect the turn they put it on themselves, that could win you the game. If you can erase targeted before they're able to get any value out of it every time, that can win you the game. So the tactician has strengths, but it's kind of a disruptible path that he has to walk to fully take advantage of those strengths. When you're playing against him, disrupt that path. That's basically what you've got to do. So if you're seeking W's with the tactician, if you like the idea of outsmarting the stronger barbarian or out sneaking the sneaky shadow thief, then this is a hero that can really help you play out that particular power fantasy. You have to focus on the tangible tactical advantage, which is kind of cool. I mean, he's a tactics focused hero who has physical symbols of his tactics on the board. So you got to get that tactical advantage going. You've got to get that targeted going, and you have to maintain a healthy hand of options and ways to pay for those options. And if you can put all of that together and survive while you're doing it, that's the path to victory for the tactician. Again, the person playing against the tactician, you want to force the tactical advantage off their board as quickly as possible, pressure their economy, pressure the hand and the coin purse. And if you're a hero who's in the position of being able to do it, you just run them down. So control heroes, do what you want to do anyway. Be the control player and force the tactician into a longer game where maybe his defense can't stand up. And beat down heroes, run in there and beat him down and get to your end point before he's able to get fully set up with his targeted on you and his protects and enough cards in his hand that he can push you off your ultimates. So Tactician is one of these heroes who has, it kind of reminds me of Gunslinger in that a skilled player who has put in the time to get good with this hero makes it look easy. And they have got the muscle memory locked in to know, oh, in this situation, I have to save my tactical advantage to remove the burn, or I'm gonna die to the pyro. Or in this situation, I want to use the tactical advantage to put the protect on because I'm trying to manipulate the hand in this way. There's so many ways that a skilled tactician player can really make you feel like, wow, this guy's overpowered. And then I put him on the table, and like the gunslinger, I'm rolling the lower number on every single one of my duels. And I'm like, how does this guy even work? So this is a very skill testing hero, in my opinion. While you can find success at competitive events with him, you're going to have to put in the work to learn the lines and really know when to deploy what effect and when to spend what card. You really just have to learn the tactics. And on that not great pun, we'll leave it there. I'm Mr. Ben. This has been the Build Phase review and analysis of the Dice Throne hero Tactician, and you should go win some games.